So welcome to the panel on this evergreen and ever important topic. What does effective cyber risk reporting and board oversight look like? And I am excited to announce our panelists today on this really important session. So we have Suja Chandrasekaran. She's Global Operations, Digital Technology, and Business Transformation Chief Executive and Board Member. Amir Clair, AVP Enterprise Risk Management at Advocate Health. And moderator Larry Clinton, President of Internet Security Alliance. Give him a round of applause, everybody.
Well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. So we're kind of getting into the home stretch here now. So good conference. You guys enjoying it? Yeah? Learning stuff? Good. I just want to take a moment to tell you how important I think it is that you are here. I agree with what Jack has said here. We are hundreds of years behind in terms of the discipline that we need to evolve to, and the work that you're doing, the time you are taking to help elevate our profession is absolutely critical. So thank you very much sincerely for being here. You guys give yourselves a round of applause. You deserve it. Now, why am I here? As pointed out, my name is Larry Clinton. I'm the president of the Internet Security Alliance, and I've been asked to do this particular panel because one of the signature activities of the ISA is the creation of these things. So these are the cyber risk oversight handbooks for corporate boards. This is the one we do with the National Association of Corporate Directors here in the US. This is the one that we just realized yesterday we did with the European Conference of Directors Associations. We've got separate ones for Germany that we did with BSI, and Latin America we did with OAS. There's a Japanese edition, et cetera. And the important thing about this is that we are trying to create a global standard for oversight of cybersecurity from the board perspective, and all of these handbooks, and we've been doing this for about 10 years now, all have the same core principles because boards really look at the same thing, across jurisdictions, et cetera. But the important element for your perspective is that these are the only set of best practices I'm aware of that has actually been independently assessed and found to actually enhance security. None of our standards or frameworks or regulations have ever been documented to do that. You can read Douglas Hubbard's book, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity, and he reveals that. But what these attempt to do is take that notion of cyber risk and help you put it into that empirical perspective that Jack was just referring to that is absolutely critical. So the purpose of today's conversation is to go into how can we take the discipline that you are engaged in and relate that better to the board. Now, in the handbooks, there are 6 different principles that we take, and we're only going to talk about a couple of them today. The first 3, just FYI, is that the board needs to understand that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, it's an enterprise-wide risk management issue and a strategic element for the board to consider. The second principle is that the boards need to understand their unique regulatory and legal responsibilities. The third is that they need to access adequate cybersecurity expertise. But principles 4 and 5, which is what we're going to be discussing today, have to do with the handshake that needs to take place between the board and the management team. The management team is in charge of cyber risk management. The board is not in charge of cyber risk management. They are in charge of cyber risk oversight. And so the issue that we need to stress about is how can we as practitioners better communicate with the board, enabling them to do their oversight and strategic function. So what we're going to do today is, and I do want to mention, by the way, that we're really grateful to the assistance that Nick Senna, the president of the FAIR Institute, had in creating Principles 4 and 5. And what Principles 4 and 5 relate to is the expectation that the board needs to have of the management team to create a sophisticated cyber risk assessment that is empirical and economic so that they can then assess what is their empirical risk tolerance and what they can do to either mitigate, transfer, or eliminate that particular degree of cyber risk. So we work kind of hand in glove with the principles of FAIR and the principles that we dealt with the NACD. So today we're going to talk about the risk management function from Amir's point of view, and then we're going to talk about how the board responds to that from Suja's point of view. So let me start by allowing Amir and Suja to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Amir and let Suja respond to that. Amir, you're up.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Larry, for moderating, and thanks to the FAIR Institute for hosting this event. My name is Amir St. Clair. I'm the Vice President for Enterprise Risk with Advocate Health. Advocate Health is a product of a very large merger in the healthcare space over the last few years that combined national systems in the Southeast and the Midwest to become what now is, depending on your metric, the third largest healthcare system in the country. My role is really to be the central nexus or the air traffic control system to make sure that we're capturing the risks, we're monitoring and assessing those risks, and then ultimately my role is to make sure that we prioritize the risks to the board based on our level of response needed. Previous background is I was a Chief Resilience Officer for Emory University and Emory Healthcare, and largely my background is in risk, business resilience, business continuity, and emergency management.
Suja.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Suja Chandrasekaran. My executive career has been in technology, operations, cybersecurity, AI, across various large companies. Notably, you would know Walmart, Nestle, PepsiCo, Kimberly-Clark, and most recently I was head of digital technology, cyber AI at Common Spirit Health, which I believe is the second largest healthcare system. So now I consider a portfolio career. I sit on 4 public boards, 2 private boards, and I chair a nonprofit of women CXOs in tech. So I do meet a lot of CISOs presenting to me. So my comments are generic across the boards I sit on currently, as well as those I sat in the past. And still applies Chatham House rules.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. So Amir, let me start with you. So when you approach a board and you're about to make a presentation to them, what's the most important thing that you want the board to be taking away from your presentation?
Yeah, good question. I think the first step, Larry, is making sure there's a common alignment or definition on what exactly is important. And that oftentimes means navigating the sometimes uncomfortable chasm between what you think is important to say to the board and what the board feels is most valuable to hear. And that oftentimes requires some type of conversation or at least an evolution through trial and error of understanding exactly what is valuable for the board from their perspective, because what I might think is important might not actually be what is critically valuable for them to lead to some type of actionable outcome. And so having clear, direct conversations at the beginning or being very aware of the trial and error process, I think is critical to actually arrive at a definition of what is important. And my experience has been that typically what is important or what's valuable for them to hear is across a 3-step process. And the first is to take the experiential depiction of a risk and how it might impact the organization, enhance that with data through some type of risk quantification process, which we're very familiar with. It's kind of been the cornerstone for a lot of the discussions today. And to make sure that as you go through that, the third step would be to create the right space or environment to make sure it can lead to either deeper conversation or some type of actionable outcome. And so that's really my role as the Vice President for Enterprise Risk, is to make sure we can capture the experiential depiction of what our leaders see across the organization, enhance that with data through that risk quantification process, and then make sure I can create the right environment for there to be some type of actionable outcome. The analogy that I'll use, and let's see how this works, is to say, if I were to ask all of you, assuming you're all leaders within the organization, to provide me a painting of this room, that is going to be your experiential depiction of what this particular room looks like. And that's really valuable for us in enterprise risk because I want to understand how you see, feel, and understand the impact of this particular space. And you will emphasize different things in the room that are valuable to you. Understanding that and capturing that is important, but that's only an incomplete assessment of this room. The next thing we need to do is bring in a high-resolution camera to take a photograph of this room, because that's going to provide us the right data to make good objective analysis and assessment as to exactly what's going on in this room, understand the different variables, but also understand the control environment within this space. So we take your experiential depiction, which are your paintings, and they're variable. Then we're going to enhance that with objective analysis through that photograph, and we can present that to the board. Now, if we stop there, my experience has told me, and I'd love to get your perspectives, is that if you do that over time, that process becomes stale. Because ultimately, you're showing a similar type of photograph to the board over a cyclical period, right? You present to the board every cycle, they get the same information, they see the same risks, you present them through the same key risk indicators, you present a similar photograph. What my job needs to be is to enhance that process by challenging the board to consider, how do we go deeper into a discussion based on this photograph, and or how do I enable them to make good decisions or have confidence in decisions that they need to take? So instead of just providing a photograph, I need to challenge them to say, does this photograph represent what we need it to look like to help advance our mission? And so that's kind of how I think we have depicted what's important to share with boards.
So give me a little perspective as to how you got to that pretty sophisticated sort of approach. What have you been learning that's helped you enhance your presentations to the board?
Yeah, a lot of trial and error, I think, Larry, in terms of going through a process, again, thinking what I think might be important for them to see or experience, and then providing some very clear and direct feedback as to what is valuable for them to hear. I'm a military background, and so I usually am pretty clear and direct. And so every time I engage with a new board or a new board chair, and every board has its own personality, of course, right? And so it's important for you to learn quickly what that personality is. I have a very clear and direct conversation with the chair to say, what do you think is going to be most valuable to hear? Here's my perspective, and I need to get very clear feedback from you to make sure that we're in alignment. So it's a lot of trial and error, but it's also a lot of clear and direct communication.
Yeah, that clear and direct communication, I hear about that a lot, that the CISOs, et cetera, need to establish personal relationships with members of the board so they can get kind of the feedback outside the boardroom. Suja, what do you look for when you are going to receive a presentation on cybersecurity? What's the most important thing from the board's perspective?
I think Amir is very correct. There is an element of trial and error. And I analogize this with the financial reports that the board gets. Very strict gap accounting rules determine how exactly those finance reports are structured. Whereas you look at the world of cyber, every CISO has their own variation, every board meeting, every company has a different variation. So there is an element of trial and error to get to what exactly works. So I'll start from what is the role of the CISO. The CISO is coming into the board certainly to inform, right? Inform what is the state of the union. How is the cybersecurity posture? What are they doing? So certainly there's an element of inform. Certainly there is an element of educate, right? This is what is happening in terms of what, other cyber situations, vulnerabilities are occurring, or this new patch has come out, or this or the software supply chain. This is a topic now we're all paying focus on. So there's an element of education. But the real most important part with the good CISOs do, but perhaps it's an opportunity for everybody, is the CISO needs to shape the context for the board. You shape the context, and this is what it means. It means that it's sort of similar to what Amir just said. You present what are the risks, you present the data, and if it is an external risk, it's an external event that occurred and you're talking about it, you're instantiating it in the context of your company's strategy, your company's people, your stakeholders, your customers, your financial future. So it's your responsibility to shape, not just listen to the context that the board is presenting, but you have a responsibility in shaping the context for the board, and that is an important element. Now, in terms of the CISOs that are presenting, I look for certain things, right? So I look for people that can sort of fluidly move between strategy, operations, and transformation. It's not just operational. It's not just looking at your metrics of how many incidents you dealt with, but it's also how are you strategically, what's your game plan? How are you transforming your environment? Because all three of those are happening at the same time. So I look for that fluidity. I look for people who can also, once again, be multidimensional, because CISOs grow up in different pillars of the executive cadres. Some CISOs grow up in tech. A lot of them actually grow up in tech. Many CISOs come from audit, internal audit, external audit. Some CISOs come up from the world of risk and many other profiles and personas. But really, when the CISO is in the boardroom presenting, he or she is talking across all of those topics in a way. It's not just a technology presentation. It is an enterprise risk conversation. So to be able to translate the risk conversation and to be able to speak about that in terms of the auditability and the traceability of that But the real thing for us is to remember is that a boardroom, there are three key aspects of the language of the boardroom. We all speak certain languages, and I'm not talking about the common language of English. The boardroom's language is three key things. One is strategy, the second is finance, the third is risk. And the board is oversighting across all three of those. And here is a CISO coming from their day-to-day meetings, and they're dealing with tool vendors, they're dealing with technologies, they're dealing with budgets, and whatever they're coming with. And you cannot forget that. You're context switching from your day-to-day, and you're really switching into the topic of that is speaking the language and connecting with the board members in those three languages of finance, strategy, and risk. For me, the good presentations, the good materials have certain pieces that are repeatable, and there are elements of it, the bones are very structured and repeatable. Yes, the content may change, and this is what I mean. The repeatable sections typically for me include your dashboards. And it's not just don't commingle operational dashboards with your transformation dashboard. An operational dashboard is your patching cadence, your number of severity and high severity incidents. You know the operational metrics. But then there is also the transformative metrics. I would put risk score in that transformative metrics because you are always moving the needle on your risk score, because the moment you move the needle forward, there is something else that comes up and you're going to come backward. So the transformative metrics, so you've got your dashboards, you've got your set of initiatives that you're focused and working on, you've got your own talent game plan, you've got your own level of investments. The boards want to know how much are you investing? Every one of you gets that question because the board has the authority to help you shape that investment. But then also you keep space in that. So there is a repeatable sections. Typically, once you reach a cadence through trial and error, I ask the CISOs to move it to the appendix, but then in your main body, that's when you do the deep dives. So I'm sort of giving you the other side of very similar to what you've said in the deep dives. It could be maybe once you're deep diving on third-party risks. Maybe once you're deep diving into your OT risks. Maybe you're deep diving into a particular topic, your software supply chain risks. You're deep diving, you're shaping the context, giving the deeper view, gaining that knowledge, gaining that content. So I would put that in that framework, but I also would say in the boards that I sit on, I certainly develop a very strong point of view of what this is or what the team is working and how they are defending. That is course, I take all of that into consideration and then I form my point of view. A big portion of the point of view also is the talent of the CISO, himself or herself. Who is she? What is she doing? How buttoned up is she? How connected and how well aware is she? Can she speak fluidly about a risk framework? So don't forget that aspect, that you yourself, in a way, you're representing the cyber risk defense posture for your company.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. There's a lot to unpack in there. Let me just try to isolate one or two things, see if we can get you to tease them out a little bit more. So first of all, the notion that the CISO or whomever is presenting here, it might be a risk officer at various companies, need to provide that business context. Are there things that you have learned from the board level that can assist the CISOs in developing that broader context? Because you're correct that many of them come from an IT background, they're often not involved in the strategy for the development of products, et cetera. So is there any sort of process that you've come across that can assist the CISO to better appreciate the full context of the cyber risk and how it affects the business?
I would say certainly stay very close to your business model and your business strategy. That is literally sitting with your CEO, your whomever you're reporting into. Maybe you report into the CTO, maybe you report into a chief risk officer, whom, irrespective of your line of organization, having a very close understanding of your business strategy. And that is revenue, certainly where are you trying to grow, what is kind of margins you're trying to take, what kind of business risks is the business willing to accept versus not accept, the business appetite and the risk tolerance of your company that comes with a combination of culture as well as your financial and economic models of your business. Understanding, really having a lot of dialogue and conversation. It's very easy, CISOs can sometimes just go very deep because the job is tough. It's not an easy job. So I would say lift your head up, go talk to the people, get a real good appreciation and taste of what's happening in the company, spend a lot of time with your enterprise resource management team because enterprise risk management team because they are understanding the risk at a much broader level. And that would be the main things I would say. And also understand the board. Over a period of time, you begin to know which board member comes from what angle. That also adds to your own context setting in terms of how you prepare and present.
So you touched on another one of those key elements that came in your first conversation, which has to do with time. I mean, I hear from CISOs all the time that getting time with the board, with the individual board members, along the lines of you're suggesting, is really difficult. Are there any practices or techniques that you've come across that can help assist with that more informal communication between the security team and the board?
The board culture and the company cultures play a big role in that. Some CEOs are very comfortable for the team to meet with board members informally. In some boards, I will just let the chair or the lead director know, and I will spend time with the CISO. I will text him, and I will connect with him very easily, fluently. I'll just talk to him. Like I emailed one of the CISOs, hey, this conference is happening. You got to check it out. It's very useful. But in other boards, it's very formal. So you need to be aware and in tune with what is the culture that your company has, and that could either help you or impede you. If it impedes, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult, and you have that limited formal connection points. But pretty much many boards have at least one board member who can go deeper into the cyber topics, whether it is a person with a tech background or a cyber background, or maybe someone who has other backgrounds, but who's developed a taste or developed a focus around cyber. Usually there is somebody, and make sure that you request a pre-meet with that person prior to whenever you're presenting, whether you're presenting to the audit committee or whether you're presenting to the full board. At least spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour reviewing your material, getting their inputs, and be open-minded. That's the thing. We all know a lot, but we also don't know a lot. So just being that open-minded in both, say, educating, setting the context, but also in terms of receiving.
So I'm thinking you would advise, that maybe the CISOs reach out individually to board members and seek that kind of one-on-one. Because I think there are probably a number of CISOs who think, well, I'm not supposed to do that. But you think that would be welcome?
Make sure you run it by your CEO. Make sure you run it by your CEO, because the CEO is the one who's directly working with the board as well as your general counsel. So informing your CEO, your general counsel, or whoever is your line of command. I'm just thinking, just don't surprise your own management.
That's good advice. So Amir, I want to go back to one of the comments that you made during your presentation, which I think aligns with Suja, where you were speaking about the need, when you get that initial picture, that you want to go to that next picture. You want to have that more refined sense. And I think you were alluding to the fact that you would want to bring people in to help with that. So are there outside entities that you find particularly helpful to you in crafting your message to the board so that it can be a little bit better received when it gets to the board?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, it's important to start with understanding the orientation that the board comes to the table with, right? And the orientation that the board comes to the table with is oftentimes informed by my experience, one or two things. It's their expertise and experience, obviously, on that topic, informed by their previous experiences. We're talking always about highly, educated, highly advanced professionals within their own industry or spaces, and so they're coming with significant experience and expertise. It's always on the particular risk we're talking about, not necessarily, but they have so many different experiences that have informed that background that we want to understand what that orientation is. The second is contemporary events. And contemporary events, in my experience, has been something that the board comes to as already helping to inform how they're viewing a particular risk. For example, in healthcare, we've had significant issues this year in the cyberspace in healthcare, whether it's the Change incident, whether it was the CrowdStrike, whether it was what we've seen in some of our peer institutions like Lurie's Children's in Chicago, Ascension. Whenever one of these incidents happen, it always informs immediately how the board considers a particular risk. What was the impact to that organization? How did they respond? How are we prepared for such a risk? And so they're coming to the table with these two types of perspectives. It's our job to help find connection points between their experiences and the contemporary events that they're looking at and make a bridge to the risk landscape of our organization so that they're better informed, but also so that they have greater confidence in whatever decision or direction needs to be taken. And I think that's critical. Now, how do we do that? Yes, we need to bring in either internal resources in the organization that are the subject matter experts or who can really help provide more confidence to the board in whatever direction or decision needs to be taken. And that ultimately depends on what the risk is. If we're talking about ransomware or phishing, we need to bring in those experts to help truly take that picture and photograph and highlight the key points. This is where the tables are in the room. This is where the lighting is. This is where the exit signs are. This is the control environment that we have. But here's also the gaps. We also need to make sure that we can bring in outside experts to understand what's happening in the industry, what are things that are about to take place in the industry that we're not focused on yet, and how do we make sure that the board starts to get oriented to our risk landscape based on their experiences and contemporary events that are happening. So again, it's our role to bridge, find those connection points between how they're coming to the table and their vast experience and expertise and our actual risk landscape at the organization. Because those two things might be far apart, and it's really our job is to bring them a little bit closer.
Can I add something
Please,
to that?
yeah.
So I use the word synchronicity. Your ideal environment is you as a CISO have an idea of what exactly is your risk position. Are you defending well? What are the gaps? In your own mind, this also determines how well you sleep at night or how well your team is sleeping at night or in general. So you have an understanding of the level of investments that are needed to go ahead to mitigate those. And your board needs to have the same level of thought process and understanding. And it's up to you to make sure that you shape their context to understand that. If based on reporting or lack of, if based on touch points or lack of, if that starts to diverge, that is absolutely not good. And unfortunately, it does happen in companies where the reporting and this interaction between the CISO and the board or whatever is a forum, it isn't appropriate. That synchronicity does miss. And don't let that happen. If you're sensing that, you've got to spend time with your leader, your CEO, and get that addressed. The second topic is, it is very interesting for the boards to listen in and understand the results from your pen test, your purple team exercises, your third-party assessments, your third-party risk assessments, your tabletop exercises, and maybe you had FAIR or somebody or a Mandiant or a rubric oversight your tabletop exercise. So those people being part of telling that story, boards really appreciate that when you do that, because they certainly trust you. You brought them a lot of data, but then you're now also adding to that an external perspective and an external view. It is very meaningful.
And can I add to that real quick? Exactly right. And I think it's about, to your point, how can you sense when there might be that divergence occurring? Or even a step further, how can you preemptively prepare for what you know will be front of mind for a lot of board members? And again, from my experience, that's where their experience and expertise plus contemporary events, things that they're reading, things that they're seeing in the industry are really at the top of mind. Being preemptively prepared to be able to address that, have a subject matter expert prepared and ready to be able to maybe answer particular questions that you know are going to be front of mind, that helps, again, provide confidence that we're aware of the landscape that's happening and that here are the ways that we're prepared to mitigate, the similar risks that we're seeing elsewhere, but also have the right resources available to answer questions that you may not know. And I think that shows good preparation and preparedness, but also you can start to sense if you're starting to get in misalignment, how you can bring back that alignment.
So I have to apologize to the group here. I am not ignoring any questions you're sending up here. They're not loading on the iPad. So now I'm going to have to ask the indulgence of my panelists because now we're going to go off script and we're going to ask you surprise questions that we didn't go through in the preliminary, but I'm sure you're going to be able to deal with it. I want to follow up on this notion of bringing people in and getting greater context, et cetera. So one of these suggestions that is in the literature, and Suja, I'd probably like to start with you on this, is that in the digital age, we really need to restructure our organizations to deal with cyber risk more from an enterprise point of view, and that instead of having this in the department run by the Chief Information Security Officer, what you really need is an enterprise-wide risk management team that includes all the departments, human resources, compliance, legal, even public relations, so that you get an enterprise-wide view of the cyber risk. Have you any experience with that kind of structure? And what might be some of the problems in creating that kind of structure from the board perspective?
It's expected, right? It is expected that there is the enterprise risk management as a process. And that enterprise risk management as a process, that is a person accountable somewhere in the C-suite Typically, it is a chief risk officer. Sometimes the risk role is juxtaposed with the head of internal audit, and they report into the CFO. So irrespective of where it hangs, or sometimes it reports to the legal counsel, I've seen all those models, but there has to be a function of enterprise risk management, which makes sure that there is a collective awareness and documentation of the risks across the enterprise, human capital risks, labor risks, geopolitical risks, all sorts of risks, including cyber risks and data privacy risks. And the CISO needs to be very closely tied into that process. Now, the CISOs, there are different reporting models of where they report into, but irrespective of where they report into, their processes need to be absolutely tied in. The best enterprise risk management organizations have very good frameworks and methodologies with which they measure the impact and likelihood with the methodology like a FAIR. And it's very similar, right? It's a materiality. Don't forget, it's not just impact and likelihood, but it's very clearly the impact, but also a site-level impact. If there is an isolated site situation, what is the impact? What is a department, division-level impact? What is the enterprise-level impact? What's the geographic, if just Europe or if just Germany or France, one country is impacted? So the enterprise risk management does that as a process, and not just that, there is very clear ranking and awareness, and that has got to be crucial. And I would expect, in a way, if the CISO speaks a certain language that's sort of hanging outside of the enterprise risk process, that's the first thing we call out. You're not talking to each other. It's obvious. From the board level, if there is any frictions within your all's teams, or if there is just by design or for whatever reason, if the process isn't interconnected, we see that very obviously because we see the full picture of the company. So I would say that is such a crucial topic.
Terrific. Now, Amir, I've got a different sort of question building off that view. My board consists of CISOs, and when this topic of having an enterprise risk management team as opposed to the CISO comes up, they get a little bit nervous about whether or not they should be in control. And some have argued that really the CISO shouldn't be in charge of cyber risk management. It should be someone with a enterprise-wide vision, a chief risk officer, a chief operations officer, maybe a chief financial officer. Where would you come down on that kind of ownership of the cyber risk function?
Yeah, it's a good. I think there might be a happy medium, and I like to use the air traffic controller analogy that I brought up before, because at least for me, I think it speaks to this issue. The way I've presented the role and really how I've worked with our leadership team is that enterprise risk certainly wants to create a unification around language, around processes, around systems, so that if we're saying these are the top risks, we have confidence that we're ranking them, we're prioritizing them, we're using similar metrics, similar language. We kind of all get that, right? The enterprise risk manager, the chief risk officer, for us, operates as that air traffic controller because ultimately what we've said is we don't own ERM, we don't own the risks that exist across our enterprise. Just like an air traffic controller doesn't own the airplanes that are flying across the airspace. Delta, American, United owns those. And they are in charge of how do they train, how do they operate, how do they maintain. They're really the risk owners for their particular airplanes. However, it is our job to make sure that we have a broad brush across the risk airspace, that we can understand all of the different risks that are operating across that airspace. And when we need to prioritize landing a plane quickly, because we see an emergency or a need or an urgency, et cetera, we have the right coordination, communication, and operational plans in place to be able to do that. So that all these independent operators, Delta, American, United, understand the common framework we're using to prioritize landing that plane quickly because of a common risk assessment. So that's the happy medium that we've used. We're the air traffic controllers. We don't own the risks, but we are responsible for making sure there's a unified, coordinated way for us to fly across that airspace, land planes when necessary, and keep everybody safe.
Great analogies. Amir has great analogies.
Isn't that a great
I've done it
analogy?
once
Yeah.
or twice. Yeah.
And I'm going to steal it, absolutely.
Please. No patent.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please.
So, CISOs, in my point of view, they are certainly the stewards of that risk management, and they are the stewards of trust for the company in that spaces that they operate in. And there is a little bit of a narrower definition that won't work, or sometimes I see that and it needs to be addressed if you're playing in that very narrow definition. So if you're only doing cyber, it's good, but it's not great. So remember, I think of this as a three-legged stool. So the one leg is definitely cyber and all the risks associated with cyber. But the second is, don't forget that you are equally part and parcel of data protection and data privacy. There is no data protection, data privacy without cyber defense. It is typically managed, and the reporting and the regulatory comes from the office, the legal office, But there is really, if there is a data leak, I'm sure there was some kind of a forensics that is needed, some kind of, potentially there was an adversary that did that. So you are definitely, the second leg is data protection, data privacy. The third is, I would say, as with this explosion of AI, the responsible AI. Responsible AI can be very disconcerting to the CISO because most CISOs operate in the open system stack in layer 3, layer 4. Some of them going to layer 7, the application layer. Even that, I would say, is not entirely as buttoned up as we've nailed sort of, it's gotten so much better in the network layer and the data center. So we have gotten good with that, but the CISOs, the really good ones, go deep into the application layer, but data, okay, that's a completely different ballgame. So don't forget that educating yourself and getting into that space, because wait until we start hearing the stories of data poisoning and things that completely contaminate your models. It's, okay, then who is the CISO is going to be the first question. So whether you like it or not, your neck is going to be in the line. So you might as well get into it, learn it, and be part and parcel of it. So in my tech roles, when I am CTO and I've got my CISO, I would call him or her, and I would always say, you're not just a CISO. You are the head of risk. You're the chief risk officer for the tech estate. You are the chief risk, so I and her, or I and him, will sit and write a risk register. So if, let's say, there's a software licensing risk, it would still be in the risk register. They're the CISO, but their role as a chief risk officer for the tech estate, the tech data, and all the digital assets estate, they are the chief risk officer.
So I think that speaks really well for the concept that we've been talking about the need for an enterprise-wide approach. I want to finish off by turning this a little bit back to FAIR specifically. So, Suja, I'd like to start with you. One of the core elements of FAIR is the need to have a sophisticated cyber risk assessment that is both empirical and economic, tied back into the business. How important are those two elements of a cyber risk report for you? Empiricism and financial relation.
I walked into, real life story, I walked into an environment as a new head of tech ops, cyber, and I walked into an environment where through their own methodology, they had a risk score, and it was a score of 9.5 on a scale of 10. So, and here is where I was thinking, okay, where do you go from that? If it's more vulnerable, okay, you just become 10 out of 10, or where do you go at that point? It was the highest risk, severely underinvested, dated 1990s kind of a gear. There were servers there that hadn't been rebooted since 1997. There were network devices. I mean, you get the picture. Very dated operating systems, 80 plus active directories. You can keep going on and on and on. So my first thing is, where do you start investing? Yes, okay, this is when everything, you could do 100 things there. We know the solution. We know what can be done. But of course, the investments are not unlimited. The work is infinite. The investments are not. So how do you prioritize? So this is where we truly sat, and when I met Saket, I came into FAIR. My association with FAIR is through Safe Security. The two are now one, and I just, that's when I wish I had met FAIR, and I wish I had met Safe and RiskLens at that time. So we pretty much built it from scratch we scored every aspect of the risk by hand based on our own internal methodology. We literally kept it in a spreadsheet, and we maintained it, and we said, okay, if we invest in here, this is going to move the needle. We sat in an exercise with the executive leadership team on what is the risk appetite. If you think you cannot get your ELTs, your CEO and his or her direct reports to agreeing on a risk appetite, you absolutely can. You just need to set the context and set the frame properly. So we said, we are at a 9.5. We're not going to become 0. It's impossible. So what is an appropriate risk? So, okay, we decided this is where we are going to be. We're going to be at a 4.5. Okay, why? It sounded like a good number. It sounded like a middle. And then we actually sat and quantified what is the material dollars and cents value of going from 9.5 to a 4.5, and then what risk are we leaving on the table, and that became the target and the focus for the insurance, right, the cyber insurance. So then the investment dollars for that were also based on moving the needle. Now guess what FAIR does? This is exactly what FAIR gives you, a methodology in a nice packaged way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are now codified into a set of tools that are automated for you. This is like, I mean, everyone should be thinking something like this. If you have a tech estate that's more than a couple of servers, I can't even imagine how, if you are the CISO or your tech leader, how you're managing it without really understanding that risk. And risk is not like old wine. You cannot understand a risk and then you can forget about it. It's the risk changes, the risk posture and position at the node level changes. How are you going to then aggregate that? So I'm a big fan. I think it's imperative.
So Amir, I'm going to give you the last word here. I mean, what are the challenges in terms of creating that kind of picture that Suja was just describing?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add to that is the FAIR model provides the validation tool to drive confidence. And really my job is to help establish confidence. Confidence that we're assessing the risk appropriately and we understand where the gaps are, or we know the mitigation or optimization strategies we need to take based on validation. And so I'll use my analogy one more time, or the picture, right? FAIR provides validation and confidence that we're using a high quality camera to take a picture of what we need to be taking a picture of. And we have confidence in what it's capturing is going to help inform the decisions that we need to make. That's critical, because it's not just about getting the board or leadership to understand the route to take or the direction that we need to take. It's about establishing a set of confidence standards that we have actually done the work we need to get to the point of a decision, and that they have confidence that we can execute that decision. Having a validation tool, the right camera, pointing at the right picture to draw the right information and data is critical.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think that was very helpful, at least for me, and I hope for you. So appreciate it.